All right, so this is just a quick follow-up on my seminar today or I'm just going to go through some of the slides that I didn't get to. Just as a quick refresher, what we're talking about is impact. So we had scholars in among our faculty talk about who's had the greatest impact on them and some explanation for why. And so then we talked about, well, what might be your impact in life, what might be your goal, your mission statement. And then we pointed to that, some of those things might be measurable, some of those things might be observable, but others might not. And there seems to be a disconnect in the sense that sometimes it seems like the more meaningful our mission statement becomes, the more meaningful our goals are, the more difficult it is for us to be able to measure that or to observe that, as in the case of like BYU's mission statement, such that if you set your goal to help individuals in their quest for perfection and eternal life, when will you ever know that you've done that? And just bringing up the idea that maybe we have to be okay with a little bit of uncertainty depending upon whether or not we're achieving our goals in terms of whether we're having the impact that we want to have. But that's connected with the kinds of goals that we set for ourselves and the kinds of impact we want to have. And so then that led to a little bit of a discussion of kind of the history of scholarship and kind of how that's changed over time, to the point now that we do have people can have impact without being a scholar, and there are many scholars who don't have impacts. And those two things are often kind of they're uh, two disconnected kind of realities. Either you're a scholar or you're having an impact, but there might be ways of bringing those two together in meaningful ways. Um, so, so this is now getting to what I kind of skipped through. So in scholarship, we have for many years tried to figure out how we can discern impact or coming up with metrics or proxies for determining impact. And we have lots of reasons for that. I mean, one is just to be sure that we're having we're playing the role in society that we want to play, that we're able to actually provide benefit as we're channeling money to public universities and so forth. But part of it too is for just simple tenure and promotion or rank and status kinds of decisions at universities to make sure that if we're hiring people to be scholars and to represent the university and to train new scholars, then are they really good at what they're doing, what we expect them to do? And so, I mean, some of the metrics or traditional proxies for that are things like number of journal articles published. Um, Dr. West and Rich have explored, for instance, how to rank different journals because it might be easy to get published in a pay-to-play kind of journal, which there are lots of journals now that are kind of predatory in nature, that really aren't widely respected, but they will target um, recent graduates or students who they know, or early career faculty who they know have to publish in order to get a job or keep their jobs. They will target them, and then they'll have really high publishing costs. So in those kinds of journals, often there isn't much of a rigor, expectation, or requirement placed upon the content or the scholarly work that is being put into the journal. It's more of it's whether or not you're published really comes down to whether or not you're willing to pay. And so, for that reason, we have to have ways of trying to figure out how legitimate, prestigious, and valuable different scholarly journals or venues are. And so, Dr. West and Rich try to do that through their rigor, impact, prestige framework, which we actually use in our department, and other folks use as well to try to do that in kind of a robust way that uses metrics like citation counts and impact factors, but that is kind of more holistic so that we're not relying upon a single measure or indicator. Um, but um, and we rely upon a lot of metrics in trying to figure out impact. So like some of the simple ones might be things like downloads. So this is an example of a master's thesis that was completed by a student in our program. All master's theses and dissertations in our program, and for most programs, are put into a free archive. So like we use Scholars Archive at BYU. And so when you complete a thesis or dissertation, that will be placed in the Scholars Archive. unless you have reasons that you'd like to embargo it, like you're trying to get it published somewhere, in which case that can happen as well. But that's more of a something to talk about your advisor with. That would be appropriate for you. But the idea here is that if you do all this work, you want to have a place where it is available to people, and then the university or the system that they use tracks that. They track again kind of the impact of your article, but the way that they interpret that is, and really the only way they can interpret that is the number of times it's been downloaded, which even the number of times something is downloaded is not necessarily a good indicator of whether or not even among those people who have downloaded it, whether they've read it, because you don't know that they actually opened the PDF, that they actually read through it, or maybe they shared it. So even with these 18 downloads here, that might mean that 18 people downloaded it and didn't read it, or it might mean that all 18 downloaded and read it, and maybe they shared it with their entire university communities, and their entire university community read it. So there's difficulty in trying to all of these metrics are imperfect measures of impact. And even if everybody did read it, does it really impact how they view the topic that you studied, or does it actually shape their thinking in any way? So again, impact is kind of a messy thing to try to deconstruct, and these are all imperfect measures. But some other measures that are pretty common to use are things like citation counts. So this is Google Scholar, the Google Scholar profile of one of our current students. And over here on the right side, you see where it says cited by. This tracks the number of times that each of the student's publications that he has had published in journals or other venues have been published or have been cited by other publications. And so the citations is the raw number of citations. H-index is intended to be a measure that isn't as easily kind of gamed as some of the others, or that is more reflective of a scholar's overall activity or presence. Because say I write one paper that gets 1,000 citations and then I don't do anything else in my career, if you just look at my citation count, that might seem fairly robust, but I've only made one contribution. The H-index is the number of publications you have that have at least that many citations. So what this means is that in this case, this scholar has had 4 publications that have at least 4 citations. So to get the H-index to go up, he'd have to have one more publication that has at least 5 citations, and all of the others that are already included in that number would also have to have 5 citations. So looking at his example here, is 23, 13, 13, and 6. So all those are over 4. So that's why he has an H-index of 4. If he wanted it to go up to 5, though, he'd have to get at least 2 more citations on this 5th article. If he wanted to go up to 6, he'd have to get up to 6 citations on the next article, as well as these others. So as you progress, it becomes increasingly difficult to raise your H-index. So the jump from a 1 to a 2 is fairly easy to make, but the jump to maybe a 4 to a 5 is a bit harder, because it's not just that you have one more publication, but that all of your publication citation counts have to rise with the number of publications that you're having. The I-10 index is a similar kind of thing, but it basically just means that you have a certain number of publications that have 10 or more citations. So in this case, the scholar has 3 publications that have at least 10 citations. Over here on the right side, you also see the since 2015 column. And this is here because oftentimes when universities care about this, they care about it for rank and status or for tenure and promotion purposes. And they're typically evaluating you on a 5-year cycle. So say I was a great early career scholar, I got tenure, and then I kind of just stopped doing work. What this since 2015 shows me is whether or not in the past 5 years I have been as productive as previously. So sometimes this is referred to as like the H5 index. So it's the H index for the last 5 years. And so that's commonly used. And as you see, so this is another current student who is a little bit further along than the previous student. But the idea is that as you grow as a scholar, as you get more publications, and as your publications have time to kind of sit there in databases and be downloaded and read and cited, that you'll gradually get more and more citations as time goes on, and those numbers will gradually increase to And so these are, again, kind of the idea is that these numbers are a proxy for the impact that you're having on the field in some way. But there's no kind of golden ticket or golden rule to know exactly how to determine impact. And so that's why, again, any of these things are imperfect metrics. Even what counts as a citation is not really always clear, or people disagree on this. So if you look at different systems, so like here you have Scopus in the top left, Microsoft Academic in the top right, and ResearchGate in the bottom right, the number of citations for even the same scholar will vary. And so this will vary based upon what kinds of publications they are kind of scraping for citations, what they consider to have merit. Google Scholar's values will tend to be higher than all of these others, simply because Google Scholar you pulls citations from resources that may not be traditionally viewed as academic, or it has a kind of a looser definition of what it will include. Whereas like Scopus will only pull citations from articles and journals that it has in its database. I also included down here, though, on the bottom left, Google Analytics dashboard, and this is a dashboard from an open textbook, just to show that there might be other ways of thinking about impact in terms of, in this case, like the number of people that are viewing your content, how many people are reading your content, and so forth. On the bottom right, ResearchGate is also trying some kind of other approaches to determining this. So the pop out that I have down there, one of the metrics is since ResearchGate is a community of scholars, they're one of the things they're trying to do is compare kind of your productivity to other people's, or interest in your work compared to other people in your field. So whereas like the Google Scholar H indices are are not normative. So for Olga to get a 6 for her H index, she doesn't have to outperform someone else. She just has to get those 6 articles. So it's criterion based, versus ResearchGate is, what some of the metrics that they're trying to do are more normative in nature. Like if you look down here, it says your total research interest is higher than X% of researchers on ResearchGate. So part of what they're trying to do is deal with the issue that some fields just generate more citations than others. So if you compare an educational technology researcher to a medical researcher, you'll see the medical researcher will get many more citations than the ed tech researcher, just because of the nature of the profession, the number of people publishing, and those kinds of things. So by doing it this way, then your citation counts or other metrics are only compared to other people in your field. And so that's the kind of the rationale behind that. So I talked briefly about these, but part of the I think question that this leads to, though, is oftentimes we spend a lot of time producing academic or scholarly work that either is not widely used, or it's not created for a general population, and so it often may not have the impact that we want it to have, even though we feel like it's strong scholarly work. And so I gave this example of this really the same content, but that is shared through different media, just to point out that it seems like there are ways of reaching either different audiences, or to expand the potential impact or reach of the work that we're doing, depending upon like the venue that we choose to follow with that. I mean, a very simple example of this is that they have done research on open access journals and find that if you publish in an open access journal, you're more likely to be cited than in a non-open access journal. And that makes sense, because a lot of people doing that might cite you may not have like a university license to a particular to the journal that you publish in, if you go the non-open access route. And so the idea is that the more open you are, but also I think like the more the format that you use, so like whether it's a 3-minute video versus a 30-page paper, will impact whether or not what you have to share will be seen and read and valued. And so that's not to call into question the value of what we do as scholars, or whether or not we should be publishing in journals, but to just bring up the issue that there might be alternative or additional ways to share information and present information that might be valuable and important. So I shared EdTech Books as an example of that as an open platform. It just allows scholars who publish through it to have a much more instant and larger reach than they otherwise would have. I think part of the reason that we struggle a little bit with this issue of impact as scholars, particularly from a social sciences research tradition, is that we're trained as social science researchers and as positivists broadly to take an objective stance on things to try to separate ourselves from what we're studying. Um, so the example here of like factory workers, this is where like the Hawthorne effect comes from. So if I'm studying the efficiency of factory workers, if I walk into that factory as a researcher and those factory workers see me, now I'm not just measuring or observing their efficiency, but I'm actually influencing their efficiency because they see me and they're going to change their behavior because they know that they're being studied. And because of that, social science researchers have historically and traditionally thought it's very important to create a barrier between, so that we're actually not having an impact on the world that we're trying to study. Because if we have an impact, then we're changing what we're trying to study. And so if everybody in the factory changes their behavior, everybody in the school changes their behavior when as soon as I come in as the researcher, then I'm not really able to study what's going on there. And so we try to distance ourselves from that, distance ourselves from having an impact. But this is some kind of responses to that would be that maybe it is our goal, especially in educational research, to have an impact. Maybe we don't care so much about what the state of the world is. We care about improving the state of the world or improving the state of education. And so this is part of the argument behind design research or design-based research, or like in critical theory, critical praxis. So it's much less important to be able to say, what the standardized test scores are for a school in a struggling neighborhood, but it's more important to actually go into that school and improve the standardized test scores. And so that may fundamentally change kind of how we think about the role of the researcher and their relationship to the larger social enterprise or the problems we're trying to solve. And I think brings up the tension here is one between viewing the researcher as a dispassionate, impact-less kind of observer, again, sitting kind of in the ivory tower, just doing their work, versus someone who is in the schools and trying to have an impact on what's happening. Um, Obviously, there's value in both. There's value in not being influenced by what's happening in the school and being a dispassionate or objective observer. But I think part of what I'm hoping to like bring up in this conversation is the idea that that's not the only way of viewing one's role as a scholar, and that there certainly seems to be value in at least questioning whether we're having the positive impact we want to be having in schools or other educational situations. So this part, I just wanted to hone back into this idea of like, or focus back in on this idea of what it means to be a scholar today. And part of this I'm drawing from a couple of different sources. The idea of superpowers comes from David Wiley. But before I get there, I'm going to talk about this diagram that was made by Matthew Might on his blog, trying to explain what the role of getting a PhD is. So he argued that, so if you consider the circle to be all of human knowledge, a single person can't know everything. And as human knowledge expands, it becomes increasingly difficult for a single person to know everything, even in this single field. So if we think about like maybe this is physics. Physics is this part of the line versus maybe education physics would be a line through this part of the circle, whereas education might be a line through this part of the circle. So this particular person might know just about everything there is about a specific branch of physics, but they might know very little about education or farming or interior design. But Matthew Might's point is that in order to get to that point where you are able to make a meaningful contribution to human knowledge generally, you have to become increasingly specialized. And your goal is not to overthrow all of human knowledge or to create a new paradigm of human knowledge, but your goal is just to create a little blimp blip on the edge of human knowledge to push it out a little bit further. And as we have people doing that in all these different fields all around the circle, that gradually expands the circle. But one of my responses to this is it's actually interesting to consider how this maybe has changed over time, in that if we go back to maybe like Aristotle, or even in examples that I gave in the seminar of Benjamin Franklin, um, Aristotle knew a lot, and he knew a lot about a lot of things um, in relation to the overall state of human knowledge at the time. So in this case, if we think about this pink shape as human knowledge, the green shape is what Aristotle knew himself, and the yellow shape is Aristotle's literacy. So basically, what books he had access to and what he was able to read if he had a question about a particular thing. If he had a particular question about the movement of the stars, he'd be able to go find a particular book perhaps on that and read about it. And so Aristotle, in relation to overall human knowledge, he knew quite a bit, and he was able to find out what he needed to know about most everything. I mean, there's still maybe some areas in this pink area that maybe some people in other parts of the world that he didn't have access to knew that he didn't know or couldn't find out. Contrast that though with this fictitious character of Philo the farmer, and who lived at the same time as Aristotle. Philo would not have been as educated as Aristotle, so his yellow area would be much smaller. So his green area would be much smaller, but he would be very specialized in a particular area. So in the area of farming, he would know a lot more. Which is, I'm trying to, again, getting back to this Matthew Might's depiction here. It's like if we were to put a line through human knowledge, like this might represent farming versus this might represent art here. So he may not know very much about art, but he knows a lot about farming. But also his literacies are limited in that he also didn't have much access to books, or maybe he couldn't even read. So if he had a question about something or wanted to learn about something, he wouldn't be able to make use of most of the human knowledge that was available to him at the time. So now fast forward to today, and what has happened is that human knowledge has expanded, and it's created a situation where maybe the scholar's relationship to human knowledge is a bit different. So again, think about Aristotle here as a scholar, an ancient scholar. Now think about a scholar today. So as an example, Jo, who's a fictitious PhD student, she knows a little bit about everything. I mean, she went through the public school system, she graduated from high school. But in order to reach the edge of human knowledge in her specialized field, she has to become super specialized. She also can read. She also has access to the internet and lots of books and those kinds of things. So she can access a lot of human knowledge. She has a lot of access to what's available to her. But because the size of human knowledge has changed so much, you notice a difference between Jo's shape and Aristotle's shape, in that Jo actually knows a much smaller percentage of overall human knowledge than Aristotle did. And that's just a limitation of who we are as humans and the limits of our brain capacity and so many hours in the day. But also notice that she has to be so in that sense, she's more like Philo than Aristotle. She knows a lower percentage of overall human knowledge than does Aristotle. But also notice that she is extremely specialized and has to be specialized in order to make an influence on her field, which again is more like Philo than it is Aristotle. So I guess I bring this up because, again, if we as scholars think of ourselves as Aristotle, at least in these ways, we're kind of more like Philo the farmer, because we are extremely specialized, and because human knowledge is so broad and diverse and expansive that there's no way that we can possibly know everything. So that's not intended to make us, question the value of scholarship or anything like that, but it's just a reality of what it seems like has to happen as human knowledge expands. And so in thinking about our specialization, which is what we do in higher education, what we do when we get a master's or a PhD, we're becoming specialized, and that specialization is our superpower. So Jo has a superpower. She is at the edge of human knowledge here in this one thing, which allows her to do things that no one else who doesn't have that intense specialization can do. but that superpower is also her weakness, in that by being so specialized in this way, that means that um, she misses out on, or just doesn't have the expertise necessary to understand all of these other aspects of human knowledge. And so I think what I'm trying to draw your attention to here is that um, our education is a very powerful tool for helping us to do good in the world, but it is a very specialized and specific tool. And for that reason, I think we need to be thoughtful about the limits of our own expertise and specialization. To recognize that just because, for instance, I'm an expert in physics, I'm probably not an expert in theology, or just because I'm an expert in instructional design, I'm probably not an expert in computer science or whatever, right? Um, and that increasingly becomes the case as human knowledge continues to expand. And so we can't think of ourselves as Aristotle or Ben Franklin in that regard, because the nature of, or just the size of human knowledge and our relative relationship to it as knowing beings has changed. Um, and so just to rehash some of these takeaways that I had, I went through them in the seminar, but I'll just maybe spend just a couple more minutes on some of them. Um, any system or metric can be gamed. So if, for instance, I go through my life thinking that citations are all that matters as a scholar, yeah, I can game that system. I can publish in just open access journals and get more citations that way. I can I can create like clickbaity kinds of titles for my articles that'll get me more citations. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with either of those things, but if at the end of the day that's all that I've done, and if at the end of the day that's the only metric or the only impact that I've been having is increasing citation counts, then that's going to lead to a very hollow existence, and I don't think I'm actually going to be having the impact on the world that I actually want to have, because citation counts are only a proxy for impact, and they're an imperfect proxy at that. And so um, even though we do need to do those kinds of things, so like if I'm trying to get tenure, promotion, or those kinds of things in an academic institution, I do need to, increase my citation counts. But that has to be done within a larger kind of understanding or framework that I also need to be performing well on things that matter the most to me. Maybe that's developing human relationships with my students and making sure that they succeed. Um, I think that yeah, BYU is really interesting in this regard, because most prestigious universities like BYU, if you were to look at, ask them or look at their policies and try to figure out, what it is they really value, it would really just come down to like grant dollars. And even citation counts aren't as important as grant dollars, or citation counts would only be seen as kind of a proxy or a predictor of grant dollars, or your ability to get grant dollars. But at BYU, the emphasis really is student development and students. And so even though scholars at BYU or faculty at BYU are expected to be world-class scholars, at the end of the day, BYU cares most that we're preparing our students to be world-class scholars. So for me as a faculty member, what that means and how I translate that is that, yeah, I need to be a world-class scholar, but when I look back at my career in 20 or 30 years, um, how I should determine whether or not I was successful will not be based upon my Google Scholar H index, but by the students whom I have helped to achieve their goals in life and have impacts on the world through the things that they're doing. But if that's not as measurable, it's not as clean cut as an H index, and so we kind of have to do both. But I think to be healthy and happy, we have to be able to recognize what those things are that really matter, and not spend all of our time just focused on gaming those metrics that might be measurable but ultimately may not matter. The second is, I see a lot of students that come into grad school who feel like they have to change the world, or that they agonize over what they're going to study or what they're going to do for a project, because they want to be sure that this is like their magnum opus, or what generations after them will look to as excuse me, as kind of this as their contribution to the world. But that's not what grad school is about. Grad school is about helping you to find the gate or the pathway necessary for you to fulfill your mission in life and have the impact that you want to have in life. So in that way, your thesis, your dissertation is not your contribution to the world. It's a gate you pass through so that you can make your contribution to the world. It's something you do to demonstrate to someone who might hire you, like a research organization or a company or a university, that you actually can be trusted to go forth and do meaningful work. So, as a student, then, yeah, you need to be strategic and try to, choose a project or a thesis or dissertation that will lead you in the right direction to where you want to go. But you don't have to view that but it's actually unhealthy, I think, to view that as your primary or even a major contribution to the world, because really what you're doing is just trying to show the world that you are um, that you can make contributions and that you're worth investing in. Um, and your ability to impact the world will be influenced by, um, um, I guess, that perception. So as I look back at like my dissertation, yeah, it was meaningful. It was valuable for me. I published it. I got several publications out of it. But now, I mean, it is connected to the work that I do now, but I don't think anyone would look at that and say, "Oh, that was your best contribution," because I don't think it was. But without that, I wouldn't be able to be doing the things that I'm doing now. The next takeaway, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but just you don't have to change the whole world, but we do need to think about the world as like different fields or different areas, and we do need to be willing to dig in deep where we are and try to have a positive impact there. Just because my um, parents still don't know what it is I do doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not having a positive impact on the world. Or just because my colleagues in computer science or humanities or whatever, don't know the specifics of the work that I do or don't value it, or they do a different kind of work that I do, that doesn't delegitimize what I'm doing. Because again, of the complexity of human knowledge, the complexity of the world that we live in, we each need to dig in deep where we are and have an impact where we are, rather than, I guess, trying to come up with um, kind of expansive solutions to all the world's problems. Building off of that, I think, especially in educational technology, this is true of all of education research, but especially in educational technology, there is this desire or intent or goal to find this one silver bullet that will fix all of our educational problems. Um, so like this takes the form of academic buzzwords, or today it's computer supported collaborative learning, tomorrow it's massive open online courses, the next day it's learning analytics. um, but there are no silver bullets. Educational problems are complex. They're complex because social relationships are complex, and education is based on social interaction. It's based on, I mean, individual people are complex, but once you mix that with social structures and politics and so forth, it becomes increasingly complex. So there is no single solution that will fix all of our educational problems, but there are incremental solutions, which I'll talk about in a second. But so what that means is that you as a student, it's not your job to find the silver bullet. Um, and if you hear people that say that they have a silver bullet, or have heard, or I use the example of unicorn. If someone says that they found a unicorn, you can assume that they're either trying to sell you something, or they're delusional, or both. And that is typically the case of what I see in educational technology, is that people will um, notoriously oversell the possibilities and effects of educational technologies, and that has all kinds of negative problems. Um, and it means that ultimately we often don't have any impact on the educational problems that we're hoping to address, because we spend all of our time treating these solutions as kind of one shot kinds of things that will fix all of our problems, rather than digging into the problem and figuring out a long-term incremental solution to it. And that's the last idea, is just that if we really do care about addressing educational problems, we need to approach them with a long-term perspective and be focused on continual innovation and incrementalism. So we can take something that isn't working well and we can build upon it. We don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't need to I read articles or proposals by people, both inside and outside education. Oftentimes, they come outside of educational research, where someone maybe who has an MBA, for instance, gets a great idea of how education would have worked better for them, and so now they have this solution that they think they want to push on all of education that will revolutionize everything that we do. And typically, it's a rehashing of something that's already been studied and that has failed in the past. Um, and so typically what you see is whenever someone has like a revolutionary solution to our educational problems, it tends to be just something that's already been studied. And if they had done a simple literature review, they would have realized that and seen what the problems are. That's not to say that there aren't innovative ideas. I mean, there are, or that we don't have room for change. There's plenty of room for change and improvement, but it's more a question of if there are no single solutions to the problems that we face, then if we're really going to solve educational problems, we have to build on the work that's come before. And so we need to recognize that we do sit on the shoulders of giants, and that the people who came before us are not just morons that didn't understand anything about learning, um, or culture or society or whatever. But we have to recognize that they were pretty smart folks, and we need to learn from them and build upon what they did, and not just assume that we need to start from scratch. And I think one of the clear examples that you see of this, and that's prevalent throughout all of education research, is how pejoratively we treat quote unquote traditional approaches to education, because there is no traditional approach to education. Um, Education has always been diverse. There have always been different ways of doing things. There have always been teachers that have been innovative. There have always been classrooms and schools that have done innovative things and gone their own way and been successful. Um, but so if we label something as traditional, typically what that means is that someone is trying to create a boogeyman of all the bad that has ever happened in education. It's a straw man argument, so that they can say, well, look at this straw man, look at this boogeyman out here that is terrible. Well, what I'm proposing now is going to solve all of our problems. But it's typically just that they don't understand what has come before, or so it's intellectual laziness on their part, and on their part of not even being able to articulate what it is that they are responding to. Um, but often also it's just manipulative sophistry. So you see this in a lot of books about education reform, where they put create a table with two columns, where in the left column they'll have the traditional, quote unquote, traditional approaches to education. In the right column they'll have excuse me, their solutions. And what you see very quickly is that things in the traditional column are certainly not universal. And what it actually is just them taking anything that they've ever heard anyone ever done negative in an educational setting, and they're calling that traditional. And so it's easy to make your revolutionary approach look good when the only alternative is everything bad that you've ever experienced or seen in educational settings. So all that is to say that I think that the most reasonable and morally appropriate way to approach educational reform and improvement in our own research in education is to take an incrementalist approach or an innovation based approach, in that we're building upon the work that has come before, we're solving problems, and we're moving forward, and we're not trying to overturn everything that's come before, because when we do that, what we'll find, and what we always find whenever people do try quote unquote revolutionary approaches to education, is that they end up having to address the same problems that were addressed 50 or 60 years ago in the educational literature. they're going to face the same problems that have already been addressed. And so it's not that they're solving any problems, but that they are really just starting over again and recreating the wheel. But it's a slightly different looking wheel with all the same problems. So that's my presentation. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your day or evening.